Hi, Michelle Cromer. This is your Creating a Meaningful Life tip of the week. I got a question from a viewer about visiting sacred sites and what was my first one and why did I go in the first place? And I really had to think about this. I love that question. So it occurred to me that we all have a moment in our lives that really puts our feet on a sacred path. And I call that the wake-up call. And the story of my wake-up call begins one Monday morning when I decided it was finally time to escape my life. I took down a globe and I put my little hand on Texas and I went all the way around, halfway around the world, and it landed on Kathmandu, Nepal. So I figured that that's what I needed to do to go completely in an unfamiliar place, so I would be forced to leave my surroundings and engage a part of my brain that had actually gone AOL. So there I was hiking Kathmandu 2 months later when it happened. I stood speechless on this grassless brown hill looking down across a muddy river to where a ceremony was taking place. The women were dressed in bright pink and orange canary saris, and these long cloths were wrapped around their waist, and then one was draped over their shoulder, and the men wore silk also, these close-fitting garments fastened in the front and extended below the knee. And a few men carefully had wrapped a corpse in a white shroud material, then carried it to the banks of the river respectfully, placing it on top of like a stack of wood, which lay on a platform or a compound. So my guide explained to me that this was part of a ceremony that the firstborn son of the man who had died earlier that day had carried a branch to the family home fireplace and lit it. And so the son slowly walked across the platform and put the wooden block right here in the middle of the man's head. And then he ignited the wood below. And the fire started. And then it just burst into flames. And everyone present took turns lighting the fire and leading the song. They looked so happy. I had stumbled onto a Hindu funeral, and it was the Hindu belief that the soul of a person who had just passed away was already on the next adventure. But in other words, the soul had already gone. But this celebration is a time for friends and family to honor the life of the person that had just died and confront death openly. The father's ashes were brought to the river by his family and spread there, life and death commingling in the symbolic rite of passage. I found the fire powerful and intoxicating and purifying, and I couldn't look away. In the West, after a death, we usually hand our loved ones over to someone that can take care of them, but they're strangers. Most of the people I know haven't held a dead pet, much less a dead body. Hindus, however, believe that you deal with the death by dealing directly with the dead. My wake-up call didn't come completely out of the blue. My daughter, Catalina, had just died. And Catalina had been born prematurely, and her heart stopped and her lungs shut down, and she died before I even had a chance to experience her life. No one knew this in Kathmandu. No one there knew that I had blamed myself for her death. And up until this moment, I had been denying myself feelings about what had happened. Now I was thousands of miles away from home. No one could come up to me and say, "I'm sorry for your loss." Death was a topic I hadn't wanted to discuss because I didn't understand the feelings Catalina's death invoked in me. I convinced myself her body was just a shell, a thing that had held no value to me. I was wrong. Her body represented the person who was no longer there. And she was the baby that I would never have and the person she would never become. So that space allowed me the opportunity to really lean into grief. And I knew that the meaning of death and life are connected. And if you love, you must grieve. Grief is like moving in reverse. It's as love had jumped into a car and gone backward. I fell to my knees. I put my head on my hands and I wailed. I could not stop crying. I was blindsided by grief. So I came back home after that trip and I leaned into understanding what my daughter's death meant to me. And so that space in Kathmandu was not only sacred to the family that had held this beautiful ceremony for their father, but it was activated by me experiencing what they were experiencing. So sacred sites sometimes are a church you go to or a pilgrimage that everyone walks like El Camino de Santiago, but sometimes it's activated by your heart. Thanks so much for the questions. Y'all ask me questions at Michelle@michellecromer.com. Thanks, y'all.